We continue to follow breaking news tonight in the search for the body of 4-year-old Javeayah Harris after her parents confessed to killing her and her mother admitted to disposing of her body.
We are starting tonight with the latest on the death of 4-year-old Javeayah Harris. News 19 has obtained arrest warrants against the parents, Michilae Harris and Johmarea Harris, that claim that they confessed to little girl's death. And tonight we also have a 911 call that investigators say the mother made to dispatchers the night she says her daughter was missing. Now, we do want to warn you some of the details from this arrest warrant.
911. Okay, yeah. Oh my God.
Okay, I'm on the way to you. Just to confirm, where was she in the house when you saw her last?
No, she wasn't in the house, ma'am. She been playing outside today. And
okay.
She asked me, can she play for a little bit more before it got dark, and I said yes. And I literally, her bath water is in the tub, ran, and dinner is cooking, and I came out here to get her, and I can't even find her.
Okay, is there a certain place she likes to play outside?
Usually in the chicken coop, and that's usually where I find her every day, and I just looked in here, and she's not.
Hey.
What you want to say about the baby?
Good time, baby.
Beginning with not missing. Not wandering the woods behind a rural South Carolina home. Dead for weeks, while her mother kept cooking dinner, kept drawing bath water, kept living inside a house with a secret so heavy it eventually needed its own excuse. Tonight, we're not asking how a mother makes that call. We're asking the harder question, why did she make it on that night, and not one day sooner, or one day later? Because according to a former prosecutor who has no connection to this case, but has handled ones just like it, the timing wasn't random. It was the last night the story could still work. Let's start with the facts, because this case has moved fast, and a lot of viewers are just catching up. Javeayah Harris was 4 years old. She lived with her parents on Hillsborough Street, near Ridgecrest Road, in Aiken County, South Carolina. On the evening of June 30th, her mother, 22-year-old Michilae Harris, called 911 to report her missing. What followed was one of the largest search efforts South Carolina has seen in recent memory. Helicopters, drones, dive teams, and eventually the FBI, combing through thousands of acres of rural land. For 4 days, the public believed this was a search for a lost child. On Saturday, July 4th, Aiken County Sheriff Marty Sawyer stood in front of cameras and said the words no one wanted to hear. Investigators now believe Javeayah was dead, and had been dead for approximately a month before that 911 call was ever placed. B-roll, press conference footage. In that same announcement, Sawyer confirmed the arrests of both parents. Javeayah's father, 23-year-old Johmarea Harris, was charged with homicide by child abuse. Her mother, Michilae Harris, was charged with the same offense, plus an additional charge of filing a false police report. Sawyer called it the hardest announcement of his 36-year law enforcement career. I am deeply saddened to tell you our investigation and evidence leads us to believe 4-year-old Javeayah Harris is deceased, he said. It is the outcome that we all feared. 2 days later, on Monday, July 6th, the arrest warrants were made public. That's where this story stopped being a tragedy with unanswered questions and became something else entirely. A documented timeline, built not from speculation, but from what investigators say the parents told them directly. The warrants are short, a few paragraphs each, but what's inside them reframes everything. According to the documents, Javeayah suffered an injury connected to physical abuse, and the warrant for Harris specifically attributes that injury to her. The warrants describe a window for that injury, sometime between May 1st and June 15th, 2026. That's roughly a 6-week span. Neither parent, the warrants allege, sought medical attention for her afterward, despite knowing she had been hurt. The legal language used is circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to human life. That phrase matters. It's the standard South Carolina law uses for homicide by child abuse, and it doesn't require proof of a single violent act. Neglect, the decision not to act while a child is dying, can meet that bar on its own. And then there's the detail that removes any ambiguity about what this case actually is. Investigators say this information came from the confessions of both parents, not solely from forensic evidence, not from stitched-together witness accounts. Both parents, according to what's filed, told investigators what happened. That's worth sitting with for a second, because confession is a word that carries more weight in public conversation than it technically carries in a courtroom. A confession in a warrant affidavit is a statement investigators say a suspect made during questioning. It hasn't been cross-examined. It hasn't been tested in front of a jury. When attorneys are eventually retained, they may challenge how those statements were obtained, what was actually said versus what was summarized, and whether the parents fully understood their rights at the time. But right now, on paper, this is what exists. Two people, separately, telling investigators a version of events that turned a missing child case into a homicide case. There's also a distinction in the warrants worth noting. Javeayah Harris's warrant does not say he inflicted the injury. It says the injury came from physical conduct by Javeayah's mother, and that he's charged because he knew about it and didn't seek help. That's a different kind of legal responsibility than being the one who caused direct harm. Whether a jury eventually draws the same line a warrant draws is something a trial, still months away, will have to work out. One more detail from the warrants sets up everything that comes next. In the false report charge filed against Herring, investigators allege she admitted to taking Javeayah's body to another location. Not the home, not the surrounding woods. Somewhere else. That somewhere else is where the second half of this story now lives, and we'll get there. The emergency call Michilae Herring placed on June 30th is now public. It runs a little over 5 minutes, and it is one of the most unsettling recordings we've covered on this channel. Not because it sounds like a lie, but because it doesn't. She gives the address, 39 Hillsborough Street. She tells the dispatcher Javeayah had been playing outside, that she went in to cook dinner, and came back out to find her gone. Herring answers without hesitation, pink Minnie Mouse pajamas, pink beads in her braids. She mentions the bathwater already drawn, dinner already on the stove, the small, ordinary details of an evening that, according to what she was telling the dispatcher, had just gone terribly wrong. When asked if Javeayah had any health conditions, Herring mentioned they suspected she might be on the autism spectrum, though no formal diagnosis had been made. She added, almost protectively, that Javeayah was smart, that she could carry a full conversation. Then the call shifts. Herring volunteers, unprompted, that she's 39 weeks pregnant and can't physically keep up with a 4-year-old. She mentions being new to the area, not knowing the neighbors well. And near the end, she tells the dispatcher her phone isn't currently active. She can dial for emergencies, but there's no working number for anyone to call her back on. Within minutes, officers were on scene. What would become a days-long search, eventually covering thousands of acres and involving state and federal resources, started almost immediately. Here's what makes this call so difficult to process now. If you didn't already know what investigators say they later learned, you would believe every word of it. The details are specific. The tone holds together. It sounds exactly like what a frightened, very pregnant mother searching for her missing daughter would sound like. That specificity is also, according to behavioral analysts who study these kinds of calls, sometimes part of the pattern. A caller who's fabricating an emergency will often front-load detail, the outfit, the last known location, the daily routine, because specificity reads as credibility. And Herring did something else investigators watch for. She raised, without being asked, a general unease about the surrounding area. In a genuine emergency, that kind of detail can be a parent's mind racing through worst-case scenarios. It can also, in a fabricated one, function as misdirection. We want to be careful here. None of this proves intent on its own, and the call has to be read alongside everything else in the case, not as a standalone piece of evidence. But set against the timeline in the warrants, it's a call that describes an emergency investigators say had already ended weeks earlier. The warrants placed Javeayah's injury sometime between May 1st and June 15th. The 911 call came on June 30th. Depending on where in that window the injury actually occurred, that's somewhere between 2 and 8 weeks between what the warrants describe happening and the moment anyone outside that house was told anything at all. This is where the case stops being about a single moment and becomes about a sustained stretch of choices. Or, more precisely, one choice that kept not getting made. The warrants allege both parents knew Javeayah had been hurt and chose not to seek help. That's not a single panic decision. That's weeks of a door staying closed. There's a recognizable pattern in cases like this, and it's worth naming, not as an excuse, but as context for how a delay like this happens. When someone has caused harm to a child or knows harm has occurred, seeking medical help and confessing become functionally the same act. You cannot walk into an emergency room with an injured child and not explain how the injury happened. For some people, once help and exposure become inseparable, inaction starts to feel safer than action, even as the situation gets worse by the day. Researchers who study these cases sometimes describe it as a cascading failure. The first day you don't seek help is the hardest day to reverse course on. But every day after that raises the cost of telling the truth. On day 1, there's still a version where it was an accident, a moment of panic, a mistake you're now correcting. On day 15, you have to explain the delay itself. By day 25, the delay has become its own piece of evidence, arguably worse than what you'd have originally had to explain. That doesn't make what the warrants describe forgivable. It makes it recognizable, a pattern investigators and prosecutors have seen before in similar cases, where a gap this long isn't impulsive. It's the product of one bad decision compounding, day after day, until turning back feels impossible. No one outside that house has spoken publicly about what those weeks actually looked like. What we do know is that the gap itself is the fact this entire case turns on, because everything that happened on June 30th was, according to what investigators allege, built to cover it. So why June 30th specifically? Why not a week earlier or a month later? This is where April Sampson comes in, a former deputy solicitor for South Carolina's 5th Judicial Circuit. She has no connection to this case, but she's prosecuted cases built on similar facts, and her public analysis offers the clearest answer to that question so far. Sampson's read is direct. Herring was 39 weeks pregnant. She was about to walk into a hospital to deliver her second child. And hospitals, labor and delivery units specifically, are staffed by people trained to ask new mothers a very specific question. Do you have other children, and where are they? If Javeayah had simply never come up, the gap might have held longer. But that's not realistic. Medical intake, hospital records, standard questions from nurses and social workers, someone was going to ask. And an honest answer to that question was a problem silence couldn't solve. So, in Sampson's analysis, instead of waiting for that question to arrive, Herring got ahead of it. She built an alternative version of events, one where Javeayah was missing, not gone, and where the timeline started that night instead of weeks earlier. Sampson explained it this way. Rather than telling everyone what had actually happened, Herring said her daughter was missing, hoping that would be enough for people to leave her alone and believe her. If that reading holds up, the call wasn't a breakdown. It was timed deliberately or not to the one event Herring couldn't delay or control, the birth of her second child. And that's exactly what happened next. Herring went into labor that same night, giving birth hours after the search for Javeayah began, while officers and drones were already fanning out across the county. The newborn has since been placed with a family member, and South Carolina's Department of Social Services confirmed its involvement following the birth, standard procedure when a parent is facing charges of this severity while an infant is in their care. For days, Sheriff Sawyer told the public investigators had identified an area of interest outside Aiken County, without naming it. We now know where that is. The search has been concentrated near Debutery Creek in Fairfield County, close to the Chester County line, roughly 2 hours north of Aiken. The creek feeds into Rocky Creek Lake, an 847-acre reservoir locals call Stumpy Pond, named for the submerged timber and tree stumps that make the water good for fishing but difficult for search and recovery work. The South Carolina Department of Natural Resources has led the operation there, with boats, ATVs, drone teams, dive units, and canine units. SLED has assisted. Fairfield County Sheriff's Office has kept the access road restricted to law enforcement, and there's no cell service in the immediate area, which makes this slow, methodical, weather-dependent work. There's a connection between this location and the family that isn't speculation. Both Herring and Harris have ties to Union County, which borders the search zone. Public records show the couple lived on Harris Street in Union County from 2024 into 2025, and both were named in separate eviction filings during that period. Investigators haven't said publicly what specific evidence led them to Debutery Creek. But the warrant language, describing Herring's admission that she took Javeayah's body to another location, combined with the family's documented history in that area, draws a connection that doesn't require much speculation to see. As of this recording, Javeayah has not been recovered, and the search continues. On Tuesday evening, More than a week after the initial 911 call, investigators returned to 39 Hillsborough Street, this time with staff from the Aiken County Coroner's Office. Fresh crime scene tape went up. For several hours, investigators searched the woods behind the home, moved through the house itself, and worked the surrounding ground. A high-ranking law enforcement source told local media this activity was evidence collection, distinct from the ongoing search at Defendants Creek. The sheriff's office has not confirmed or denied that characterization, saying only that this remains an active investigation. Note, some earlier reporting referenced specific items recovered during this search. We are not including unconfirmed item-level details in this script, and will update if the sheriff's office releases them officially. The coroner's involvement at the home matters. In South Carolina, that office determines cause and manner of death. Its presence suggests investigators are now looking at the property differently than during the initial missing person phase, not as the place Javeayah disappeared from, but as the place where what the warrants describe may have actually happened. That means two active scenes are being worked simultaneously, a house in Aiken County and a creek 2 hours north in Fairfield County, with different teams doing different work at each. One is searching for Javeayah. The other is gathering evidence of what happened to her before she was ever moved. Outside the home, the community's response has continued to grow. Neighbors and strangers alike have built a memorial at the mailbox, stuffed animals, balloons, candles, Minnie Mouse toys, almost everything in pink. One neighbor, describing the outpouring, said simply that no matter what a child is born into, no matter what she goes through, she is loved, that they love her even without having known her. Both parents appeared before Magistrate Judge Ronald Thornton on Sunday, Herring in the morning, Harris in the afternoon. Neither had an attorney present. Both were denied bond. The reasoning was procedural, not personal. The charges carry a mandatory minimum of 20 years and a maximum of life in prison. Under South Carolina law, a magistrate simply doesn't have the authority to set bond on a charge that serious. That decision now falls to a circuit court judge. Their next scheduled court appearance is September 18th. A few ordinary details came out during the hearings. Herring told the court she worked at Transcom, a customer service company, earning roughly $1,300 every 2 weeks. When asked who else lived in the household, she named Javeayah's father, saying he worked at DHL. The judge ruled her income too high to qualify for a court-appointed attorney. Small details, but they sketch the outline of an ordinary household: 2 incomes, an address, a routine. The kind of life where a 4-year-old's absence would eventually need to be explained to somebody: a coworker, a relative, a hospital intake form. The bond denial also tells you something about how the court is treating this case from the outset. It's not a statement about guilt, it's a statement about severity. And because the next hearing isn't until September, that means both parents will spend more than 2 months in custody while the investigation continues, while evidence is processed, and while the search at Defendants Creek either produces results or doesn't. It's also worth remembering, nothing in the warrants has been tested by a jury yet, and both parents remain legally presumed innocent. The standard for an arrest warrant is probable cause, a reasonable belief a crime occurred and that these individuals committed it. The standard for a conviction is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Those are very different bars, and only one of them has been cleared so far. As Sampson noted in her analysis, cases like this typically take a year or more to reach trial. Before most of these warrant details were public, hundreds of people showed up to a candlelight vigil in downtown Aiken. No one publicly claimed to have organized it. People simply started arriving, and then started speaking. A local restaurant owner prepared dozens of meals, unprompted, and drove them out to search crews working in Fairfield County. Another vigil is planned, with attendees asked to bring their own candle, ending in a walk to the memorial outside Javeayah's home. It's worth sitting with what a community builds in a case like this: the vigils, the meals, the pink ribbons for a 4-year-old most of them never met. It doesn't undo anything, and it isn't justice. But right now, it's the only thing people outside that investigation have the power to give her. Here's where this case stands right now. Javeayah has not been recovered. The search at Defendants Creek continues. Both parents remain in custody without bond, without attorneys of record, and without a public account of their own. Their next hearing is September 18th, and additional charges remain possible according to the sheriff's office. The gap between what happened inside that house and when anyone outside it found out was always going to close eventually. The only open question was what would close it, the truth or a story. According to the warrants, for 25 days, it was the story. If you have any information related to this case, contact the Aiken County Sheriff's Office or SLED's tip line. Rest easy, Javeayah. This case is moving fast, faster than almost anything we've covered on this channel. And we will be back the moment something breaks. If Javeayah is recovered, if new charges are filed, if the September hearing produces anything at all, you'll hear it here first. If this is your first time on the channel, go watch our previous coverage of this case. It covers the original search, the neighborhood, and the sheriff's first announcement, and it'll give you the full context for everything in this video. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the update when it comes. And in the comments, now that you've heard the 911 call in full, tell us, what stands out to you most?
We are starting tonight with the latest on the death of 4-year-old Javeayah Harris. News 19 has obtained arrest warrants against the parents, Michilae Harris and Javeayah Harris, that claim that they confessed to little girl's death. And tonight we also have a 911 call that investigators say the mother made to dispatchers the night she says her daughter was missing. Now, we do want to warn you, some of the details from this arrest warrant are deeply...
Still call 911.
Okay, yeah.
Oh my God.
Okay, I'm on the way to you. Just to confirm, where was she in the house when you saw her last?
No, she wasn't in the house, ma'am. She been playing outside today. And
Okay.
she asked me, can she play for a little bit more before it got dark? And I said yes. And I literally, her bath water is in the tub, ran, and dinner is cooking, and I came out here to get her, and I can't even find her.
Okay, is there a certain place she likes to play outside?
Usually in the chicken coop, and that's usually where I find her every day. And I just looked in here, and she's not.
Hey,
What you want to say about the baby?
good time, baby.
Beginning with who Javeayah actually was. Javeayah Harris was 4 years old. She lived with her parents in a quiet residential stretch of Aiken County near Hillsborough Street and Ridgecrest Road. Modest homes, long yards, the kind of neighborhood block where people know each other's names. Her parents were young. Her father, Johmarea Harris, was 23. Her mother, Michilae Harris, was 22. According to court records, Harris worked for Transcom, paid bi-weekly, and Harris worked at DHL. At the time Javeayah was reported missing, Harris was 39 weeks pregnant, due, essentially, any day. Neighbors described a family that seemed, from the outside, unremarkable in the way most families do until something like this happens. We don't yet have extensive on-record detail about Javeayah's personality, her school, or her daily routine. Reporting so far has focused on the investigation itself rather than a fuller portrait of who she was as a little girl. That's often how these cases unfold in the first days. The missing child stage moves so fast that the person at the center of it becomes, briefly, a photograph and a physical description before she becomes a fuller story. We'll update this section if and when more of that comes out through family or court testimony. What we do know is this: she was loved enough by someone that when she disappeared, this community turned out in force. And she was failed badly enough, according to what investigators now allege, that turnout came weeks too late. It's also worth naming something about how this case has been reported so far. Her name has appeared across different outlets with slightly different spellings. Javeayah, Javeayah Harris, which is common in fast-moving cases before an official, consistent spelling is locked in through court filings. We're using Javeayah Harris, matching the spelling used in the arrest warrants and in direct reporting on those documents, and we'll stay consistent with that going forward. Before we move into the incident itself, it's worth stepping back for a moment, because cases with this specific shape, a reported disappearance that turns out to mask a death that occurred earlier, aren't unique to Javeayah's case. Child welfare researchers and prosecutors who handle these cases have long noted a recognizable pattern. A fatal injury or a death from prolonged neglect occurs. The caregiver responsible doesn't seek help, and rather than report the death, they report a disappearance instead, sometimes days or weeks later, once the absence becomes impossible to hide or once external pressure forces the issue. That pattern shows up in headline cases across the country from time to time. And it's part of why an intensive, multi-agency search doesn't automatically mean investigators believe a child is realistically still findable alive. Search protocols are built around the assumption that a report is accurate until evidence says otherwise, which is exactly why Aiken County's response looked, for 4 days, identical to a live recovery search, because that's what the information on hand at the time called for. It's not until forensic and investigative work catches up, timeline inconsistencies, physical evidence, or in this case, apparently information developed directly through the investigation, that the true shape of a case comes into focus. I'm laying this out not to draw a direct comparison to any other named case, but because understanding that this pattern exists helps answer something people often ask in the comments. How do you go from a full-scale search to a homicide arrest in 4 days? The honest answer is usually that the search never stops being justified by what was known publicly at the time. It's the underlying truth that was already, quietly, something else. On the night of Tuesday, June 30th, at roughly 8:15 p.m., Aiken County Dispatch received a 911 call. The caller was Michilae Herring, Javeayah's mother. According to the incident report, Herring told deputies she'd last seen her daughter around 8 p.m. playing near the family's chicken coop, in a pink Disney shirt, shorts, pink beads in her hair, and Crocs. On the actual 911 recording, which the sheriff's office later released, Herring can be heard distraught, telling dispatch that Javeayah had been playing outside shortly before dark, and that she'd searched a wooded pathway behind the house, trying to find her. She also told the dispatcher, in that same call, that she was 39 weeks pregnant. Javeayah's father told investigators he'd returned home around 9 p.m. that night, after saying he'd spent roughly an hour and a half at a laundromat. Within the hour, this stopped being a routine missing child call. It became one of the largest coordinated search operations Aiken County has run in recent memory. By the next morning, the Aiken County Sheriff's Office had brought in the FBI's Columbia Field Office and the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division SLED. Search and rescue teams, 9 units, drones, and at least 1 helicopter fanned out across the area. Over the following days, crews would cover thousands of acres, some estimates putting it well past 5,000, on foot and from the air, in heat pushing near 100 degrees. Bethel Baptist Church, just around the corner from the family's home, became the command post. Investigators gathered there before dawn each morning before heading back out. Digital billboards across the county started carrying Javeayah's photo. Roadblocks went up. Deputies searched vehicles and ran interviews late into the night. And even in those first days, there were details that didn't sit right. Neighbors told local reporters they hadn't actually seen Javeayah around the neighborhood in some time. Not days, but longer. That's the kind of detail that, in hindsight, becomes a flashing warning sign. In the moment, on day 1 or 2 of an active search, it's just one more inconsistency investigators are quietly working to reconcile while the public search continues in front of the cameras. The FBI's involvement went beyond boots on the ground. Special Agent in charge Kevin Moore later confirmed that the Bureau deployed members of its Behavioral Analysis Unit and its Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team, alongside digital media review and neighborhood canvassing. For context on what that actually means in practice, the Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team, often shortened to CARD, is a specialized FBI unit built specifically to respond within hours to reports of missing or abducted children, bringing agents experienced in exactly this kind of case to work alongside local law enforcement rather than replace them. The Behavioral Analysis Unit's involvement typically means agents were reviewing the case for patterns, inconsistencies in statements, behavioral red flags in interviews, anything that might separate a genuine abduction from something else. And digital media review is exactly what it sounds like, pulling phone records, social media activity, and any available digital trail for the household and everyone connected to it, looking for a timeline that either confirms or contradicts what's being told to investigators verbally. All 3 of those resources being deployed simultaneously within the first 24 to 48 hours tells you this wasn't being treated as a routine case from the very start, even before anyone outside the investigation understood why. For 4 days, this looked, publicly, like exactly what everyone feared, a race against time to bring a little girl home alive. It's worth pausing on the sheer scale of what was mobilized here, because it puts what we now know in a sharper focus. This wasn't two deputies driving around a neighborhood. This was the FBI's Columbia Field Office, including specialized behavioral and child recovery units. This was the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, the state's top investigative agency, typically reserved for the most serious cases in South Carolina. This was sheriffs from Edgefield, Lexington, Kershaw, and Richmond counties, none of whom had any jurisdiction over Aiken County, showing up anyway because a child was believed to be in danger. This was the Aiken and North Augusta Departments of Public Safety, Aiken County EMS, Lexington County Fire Service, and a County Emergency Operations Center. Read that again the way it's written in the court documents. Not that she reported finding a body, not that she led police to one, that she admitted to disposing of it. That is the sentence that turns this from a missing child case into something else entirely. I want to be careful here, because this is exactly the point in a case where it's easiest to run ahead of what's actually confirmed. What we know from the warrants is a charge and an allegation, not a courtroom finding. Neither parent has been convicted of anything. The search for Javeayah's remains has continued in the weeks since, focused not in Aiken County, but roughly 2 hours north, in Fairfield County near the Chester County line, around an area called Great Falls and a waterway called Debutery Creek. SLED, the State Department of Natural Resources, and the Fairfield County Sheriff's Office have all been part of that search, using boats, drones, and ATVs. As of this recording, Javeayah's body has not been recovered. Quick pause. If you're new here, this channel covers cases like this one carefully, using court documents and verified reporting rather than guesswork, and we update as facts change instead of locking in a narrative on day one. If that's the kind of coverage you want more of, hit subscribe now, because what comes next in this case, the custody question around the newborn baby, and what the defense is likely to argue about that month-long gap, is still developing. When we come back, what happens to the baby Michilae Harris gave birth to on the same night she called 911, and why South Carolina's Department of Social Services is already involved. Welcome back. Let's talk about where this case actually stands right now, legally, because there are several threads here that matter. First, the charges themselves. Homicide by child abuse, under South Carolina law, is one of the most serious charges available short of a standard murder charge, and it carries a potential sentence of 20 years to life. Michilae Harris faces an additional charge of filing a false police report, tied directly to that June 30th 911 call, a charge that, on its own, carries up to 5 years or a $5,000 fine, but which becomes almost secondary next to the homicide count she's also facing. Read that again the way it's written in the court documents. Not that she reported finding a body, not that she led police to one, that she admitted to disposing of it. That is the sentence that turns this from a missing child case into something else entirely. I want to be careful here, because this is exactly the point in a case where it's easiest to run ahead of what's actually confirmed. What we know from the warrants is a charge and an allegation, not a courtroom finding. Neither parent has been convicted of anything. The search for Javeayah's remains has continued in the weeks since, focused not in Aiken County, but roughly 2 hours north, in Fairfield County. Instead, these statutes typically require prosecutors to show that a person caused a child's death while committing child abuse, or while showing extreme indifference to the child's life, a standard that can be met through a pattern of neglect or a failure to act, not only through a direct violent act. That's part of why this charge, rather than a standard murder charge, is the one both parents are facing here, and it's also why the extreme indifference language used in some of the reporting on the warrants isn't incidental. It's very likely lifted close to word for word from the statute itself, because that's the legal standard prosecutors will eventually have to prove at trial. In terms of what actually happens between now and September 18th, it's worth walking through the process generally, since a lot of viewers ask what a first appearance even means. A first appearance in South Carolina's General Sessions Court isn't a trial and isn't where a plea is typically entered. It's usually a procedural hearing where the court confirms the defendant understands the charges against them and where scheduling for future proceedings begins. Before this case can go to trial, it will almost certainly need to go before a grand jury, which decides whether there's sufficient evidence to formally indict on the homicide charge. Given the severity of the charge and the amount of physical and forensic evidence still being gathered, including whatever comes from the ongoing search for Javeayah's remains, it would not be unusual for a case like this to take a year or more to reach an actual trial date. That's not unique to this case. It's simply how serious felony cases move through the South Carolina court system. And it's worth setting that expectation now rather than assuming any single September court date will resolve much of what people are hoping to see resolved. On the evening of July 5th, the same day both parents were denied bond, a candlelight vigil was held for Javeayah at a location in downtown Aiken known as the Alley. Mourners gathered wearing pink, many of them holding candles and stuffed animals, echoing the bright pink outfit Javeayah was wearing in the photo circulated during the search. The group sang Amazing Grace and Jesus Loves the Little Children and recited the Lord's Prayer together. Several speakers who had never met Javeayah described feeling connected to her regardless. One attendee, Dorothy Burton, said the community had shown up for a child they'd never known but loved anyway. Another, Stephen Brown, said watching a 4-year-old go through something she couldn't defend herself against felt personal, like that was my child. In the days since, a makeshift memorial has grown outside the family's home on Hillsborough Street. Flowers, balloons, stuffed animals, and handwritten notes left by neighbors and strangers alike. One woman who started the memorial, Dawn Graziano, said she'd never met Javeayah, but couldn't shake the feeling that something had to be done. Among the first items placed there was a stuffed elephant, given by Graziano's own 3-year-old granddaughter after being told a little girl needed her favorite toys in heaven. That's the kind of detail that tells you more about how this community absorbed this case than any press conference could. Grief being processed, quite literally, at ground level, by people with no connection to Javeayah at all beyond geography and heartbreak. That's one of the harder things to sit with about this case. Hundreds of people, deputies, FBI agents, SLED investigators, volunteer firefighters, sheriffs from counties with no jurisdictional reason to be there, spent 4 days in dangerous heat searching for a little girl based on a report that, according to the state's own allegations, was false from the moment it was made. Special Agent Kevin Moore said it plainly at that July 4th press conference. It's heartbreaking that law enforcement wasn't able to stand there with better news. What none of them knew, in that moment, was that better news had stopped being possible weeks earlier. The search for Javeayah's remains hasn't stopped. As of this recording, SLED and Fairfield County authorities continue to focus efforts around Great Falls and Debutery Creek, roughly 2 hours from where this all began. Sheriff Sawyer has said repeatedly that bringing Javeayah home, meaning her physical remains, matters to this community and to the family regardless of how the criminal case unfolds. Javeayah's extended family has largely stayed out of the public eye, and Sheriff Sawyer has specifically asked media and the public to respect that privacy while they grieve. That's a request worth honoring here too. This is a family that showed up to search for a child some of them may not have known was already gone, who are now processing that loss alongside the reality of who's been charged in connection with it. There's also the community itself to think about here. Local residents told...
We've been out here for 4 years now. We know pretty much most of the people in this neighborhood, the kids, the whole thing. And for the girl to live literally right around the corner, we're out here all the time. Like every day somebody's out here. And we would have noticed a little girl walking this way.
In the days since, a makeshift memorial has grown outside the family's home on Hillsborough Street. Flowers, balloons, stuffed animals, and handwritten notes left by neighbors and strangers alike. One woman who started the memorial, Dawn Graziano, said she'd never met Javeayah, but couldn't shake the feeling that something had to be done. Among the first items placed there was a stuffed elephant, given by Graziano's own 3-year-old granddaughter after being told a little girl needed her favorite toys in heaven. That's the kind of detail that tells you more about how this community absorbed this case than any press conference could. Grief being processed, quite literally, at ground level, by people with no connection to Javeayah at all beyond geography and heartbreak. That's one of the harder things to sit with about this case. Hundreds of people, deputies, FBI agents, SLED investigators, volunteer firefighters, sheriffs from counties with no jurisdictional reason to be there, spent 4 days in dangerous heat searching for a little girl based on a report that, according to the state's own allegations, was false from the moment it was made. Special Agent Kevin Moore said it plainly at that July 4th press conference. It's heartbreaking that law enforcement wasn't able to stand there with better news. What none of them knew, in that moment, was that better news had stopped being possible weeks earlier. The search for Javeayah's remains hasn't stopped. As of this recording, SLED and Fairfield County authorities continue to focus efforts around Great Falls and Dubuque Creek, roughly 2 hours from where this all began. Sheriff Sawyer has said repeatedly that bringing Javeayah home, meaning her physical remains. Here's what stays with me about this one. For 4 days, an entire region mobilized, federal agents, state police, volunteer fire departments, ordinary neighbors, around the hope that a 4-year-old girl was still out there, scared but alive, waiting to be found. That hope was organized, funded, coordinated, and genuine. And according to what investigators now allege, it was built on a lie that had already been true for a month. This case isn't over. There's no trial date beyond a September court appearance. There's still a search underway for Javeayah's body in a creek nearly 100 miles from her home. And there are 2 people in custody who are, as of right now, accused, not convicted, of causing her death and lying about how she disappeared. We'll be back with an update the moment there's something new to report, whether that's a recovery of remains, a plea, or a trial date. If you want that update the moment it drops, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this channel doesn't chase a case for one video and move on. And if you're watching this and you're in a situation where a child in your life may be at risk, whether that's something you're seeing directly or just a feeling you can't shake, please don't wait. The way this case shows what waiting can cost. In the U.S., you can contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453, available 24/7, or contact local law enforcement or Child Protective Services directly. You don't need to be certain to make that call. You just need to be concerned enough to let someone qualified look into it. Rest easy, Javeayah. If you have any information related to this case, contact the Aiken County Sheriff's Office directly.